few things here before, as we get started this morning. First of all, just to let you know, man, I've been so excited to hear all the great accounts of how God has been moving in small groups in our in our church over the last 3 weeks as they've been going on. We took a step by faith. We added one, and we added 2 communities to our small groups. And so there's ones in Worcester and Holden, of course, and now there's ones in Sterling and Spencer, and God is moving in those. And we're excited about what He's going to continue to do in those groups, in those communities, as we move forward. Our desire is to connect and lead people to a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's what we're called to do. That's our mission. And we're seeing that by turning our communities into family and just reaching out to people. We're not perfect. We're humans, right? That's difficult. Have you met that perfect human yet? Other than Jesus? Well, I'm very spiritual. Yes, you are. But other than Jesus, we haven't found that perfect human being. And so, man, we're just, one way to be family is just to pour grace on one another. And just to love on one another more than, because that doesn't always happen in families, right? And but whether it be your family or your church family or friends, just pour grace on people and show them the love of Jesus. And so that's one way. That's one thing that's kind of exciting me about our small group, is how love and grace is pouring out in different communities around central Massachusetts. Another thing is we are actively looking for a future church home, so be in prayer for that. Our desire is to be somewhere in the next 2 to 3 years. Specific, I would say that's our desire. We've given it kind of a 2 to 5 year process. But we're looking, we're praying, and we're excited about what God is doing even in our decision making. Because it's a big, massive decision, right? And it's scary. And we want to see God use whatever building we put, not just in a 1 day a week event, but as a community center. As how can you use this all the time? How can you kind of wreck our lives and move us in a way that we aren't used to? And so that's what's going on here. Also, and I'm not supposed to say this, it's Sean Leary's birthday. So you need to say happy birthday to Sean Leary. Amazing guy, leader in our church. And he was the one that welcomed you as you came in. And he's going to be really mad at me. But it is what it is, 60s are coming, my friend. Anyways. All right, here we go. Week 4 of broken homes. We've been talking about, how to take a broken home in a spiritual sense and make it whole. And even a lot of this stuff moves into the idea of in a physical sense as well. And I hope you've realized that as we've gone along. But more times than not, or a lot of times, we've seen dysfunction in our homes. We've seen hurt in our homes and in other people's homes. And we want to help it. We want to fix it. And so what we've tried to do in this series is talk about, what are ways that, spiritually speaking, how do we take a broken home and make it whole? So we started off by talking about the foundation of a home that's whole, is one of surrender. It's not one of me first, but it's one of you first, God. And how can I take my rebellious side? And by the way, teenagers aren't the only ones that have rebellion, right? We all have rebellion. If you're an adult, you have rebellion in your life. If you're a kid, you have rebellion. My 2-year-old twins have rebellion. Shockingly. When they look up to me and say, no, I'm like, did you get that from me or someone else? I'm super excited about their growing up, but they're rebellious. But you know what? They get that from me. They get that from their mother. Rebellion, when we give over rebellion and say, I'm going to surrender my life, to something greater. I'm going to surrender my life to God. I'm going to surrender my life to the person of Jesus Christ. Things begin to change. Now, it's not always perfect. Life isn't always perfect. But what I find is that wholeness begins to take place in my life. And then the second week we talked about the frame of any home, any family, and that's the marriage. And keeping that the most important thing. And one of the things we say all the time, and I say all the time, is that kids never grow up and say, man, I'm so messed up because my parents loved each other too much. And then last week, of course, we talked about household chores, because every house you have to have household chores. But you know what that translates into spiritual life is communication. And you can't have a whole home, spiritual or otherwise, unless you have proper and right communication. And so that leads us to this week. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't have any cool kind of sounding analogy in terms of what this is. I just know that every family has it. And that is the overall energy of your home. You know, you walk into a home and you kind of sense that this group of people have affected one another in some way. And there's a temperature of the home. And there's a temperature, some homes are very proper. My mom's home, they were very proper, and they, everything was in its right place. And, whenever I was a kid, when I go over to my grandmother's house in Detroit, I couldn't touch anything because everything was perfect. And that was the temperature of their home. Now, my dad's was very different. It was also very clean. Everything had its place, but it was more, you go there, you sit down, you watch football, what's going on? You crack jokes, tell stories. So it was a very different environment. But every family has a temperature. Now, here's the thing about spiritual temperature of those who are Christians, those who follow Christ, is this. The spiritual temperature of every, I'm just going to come out and say it, of every spiritual home must be hope. It has to be hope. Now, that's very difficult because we have a lot going on, a lot of difficulty. Things happen. Things get difficult. We start to doubt. We start to get busy. All these things happen. But in terms of a home that is whole, the overall energy of it must be hope. On September 12th, 1987, I went to go play football with some friends of mine. Actually, my sister was one of them. I could beat her every time. Boom! I thought that would go way better. And then there was our friend Mario, who lived across the street. And we usually drove down on our bikes. We'd ride our bikes down, and we'd get our friend Brian. And we'd play a little 2-on-2. And so this one day, September 12th, 1987, we drove about a quarter of a mile on our bikes. That's rode, I guess. It's not drove. We rode on our bikes, and we knocked at Brian's door. His mom said, yeah, here he is. And so Brian came out, and we got on our bikes, and we rode. And I was first, and Brian was second, and my sister was third, and Mario was fourth, and we were just kind of riding down the quarter-mile ride back to the football field. And as we did that, Brian decided that he wanted to go past me. Now, if you don't know anything about me, I'm a very competitive person. And so is Brian, and so is my sister, and so is Mario to a lesser degree. So we got on, we were riding, and he tried to pass me. And we were going really fast and super fast. And all this, and our handlebars was going back and forth. And all of a sudden, our handlebars hit one another. And I fell off to the right. And Mario fell to the left. And he fell far enough to where a car was coming by. Or I'm sorry, not Mario, but Brian. And Brian hit the car. 3 days later, Brian passed away. I can't tell you all the things that I was feeling at that point. I know I felt like it was all my fault. I felt like all these people in the world were going to hate me. And I remember sitting down with my dad this one particular day, and we were sitting down on some steps. I had been sitting there just thinking about life, and it was right after I had actually had an interview with a police officer. We sat down. My dad said, Marty, you need to know something. He said, this is not your fault. And then he continued, he told me, this is a really, really difficult situation. He said, but things will somehow work out and get better through this situation. He said, I don't know how. He said, I don't know what life looks like on the other side for this family. But he said, it will get better. You know what my dad was doing? He was offering hope. In a scenario and in a situation where there is little. To a 12-year-old boy who felt like there was none. He was offering hope. And I remember sitting there thinking about Brian for so many days and weeks after, until I remember a time in a situation where my dad came in and he said, Marty, I have something else to tell you. He said, I want you to know that Brian's entire family, as a result of a pastor of my dad's, gave their entire lives to Christ. Now, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know why that had to happen. Or I don't know if we can honestly say, is that what had to happen or what? But I know this, that in a scenario where there seems like there's no hope, we are frequently reminded and told that if you are a follower of Christ, there is hope. There is always hope. And most of us have lost someone sometime in the last several years. But one of the things that breaks up homes and makes it difficult in relationships sometimes is the inability to handle loss appropriately. And it's not easy. And by the way, not just people, but also things. When we lose someone close to us and we feel like we can't go on. When we lose someone close enough and we feel like we didn't get all the stuff that we should have from them. Or when we lose things and we feel like we want the stuff that we used to have. But here are two truths that we're going to wrap up with in this series and talk about this morning. First of all, the object of your hope is important. And then second of all, how I share hope actually leads to hope. The object of your hope is important. And then second of all, how I share hope, how I give off hope, you could say it this way, how I push hope leads to more hope. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul is talking about the resurrection in future times. And this mirrors many of the other passages that he's talked about in places like 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and other letters. But he says here, as he's talking to this church that is going through something, this church that really is messed up. I mean, if you ever read through 1 Corinthians, you're going, man, these people got some issues. Until you kind of think about our own lives. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's like us. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 50, Paul says this, what I am saying, dear brothers and sisters, is that our physical bodies cannot inherit the kingdom of God. These dying bodies cannot inherit what will last forever. Now, what Paul is saying here, he's basically mirroring a story that the Jewish people had had for centuries that was based on what they were taught by God, their belief in this one true God. And the story was this, that there will come a time when heaven is unveiled, the royal Lord will appear, the dead will be raised to their new bodies, and all of creation, now think about this, all of creation is liberated from the decay of present life to share the freedom of the glory of God's children. This was a part of the Jewish culture. This is what they taught in the Old Testament. That God was going to make all things new. And so Paul wasn't moving away from this to say something different. He was saying, this is how it is. This is what's taking place. God is going to be doing these things. He's inaugurating these things. Now, continuing on. But let me reveal to you a wonderful secret. We will not all die, but we will all be transformed. In other words, Paul believes that everyone will be transformed into this incredible new creation that God will create. However, not everyone will die. Some will actually see this happen. This is a hope thing. This may be us, we may actually see this, or we may see it in the future. This is the hope we have. Now, he continues. It will happen in a moment, in the blink of an eye, when the last trumpet is blown. For when the trumpet sounds, those who have died will be raised to live forever, and we who are living will also be transformed. For our dying bodies must be transformed into bodies that will never die. Our mortal bodies must be transformed into immortal bodies. There will come a time when God creates eternity, and that eternity focuses on Him. And our present bodies apparently won't stand up in this eternity. So even those of us who are living will have to be be transformed bodily. Okay. Then in verse 54, then when our dying bodies have been transformed into our bodies that will never die, this scripture will be fulfilled. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? He's quoting from Isaiah chapter 25. He's quoting from the Jewish story of what God is going to do. For sin is the sting that results in death. Sin, or the human condition that breaks us apart from God. And the law gives sin its power. See, this is what was happening in the Jewish culture, at least in Paul's culture. The law, they were so focused on obeying the law, on getting to God through being good and obeying the law. Okay? And what that was doing is it was giving this sin, it was breaking them farther apart from God by their focus being focused on obeying the law. And so, to look more into this, Romans chapter 7 to Romans chapter 8, 11, it's a great passage of Scripture, but it's a great study that Paul writes if you want to kind of focus in more on how powerful sin is and how the sting of sin is ultimately death. Verse 57, but thank God. I love this passage, this phrase. But thank God. He gives Marty. He gives Ray. He gives Megan. He gives us victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. In other words, that time when heaven appears and the Lord rules was inaugurated by the coming of the Messiah, who he believed and we believe is Jesus. And his resurrection enabled sin and death to be conquered. This is huge. This is monstrous. This is something we grab onto as Christians and say, this time is inaugurated. Things are not bleak. Things are not that bad. We can get through this. Why? Because God has given us the victory over sin and death through Jesus Christ our Lord. So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord. For you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. What do you mean it's not useless? Of course it's useless. It's all going to end. We're all going to die. Let me ask you something. How do you fight misery? Do you lash out? Do you complain? Do you gossip? Do you get bitter? That's what many of us do when we try to fight misery. We are miserable, and so we fight that with more misery. And the cycle continues. But the thing is, if you're a follower of Christ, and this is not always easy and this is not always difficult, and the only way we can really do it and not be fake is to do it through the power of the Spirit of God in our lives. Okay? So this is not something where you put a tie on and smile, come to church. Hee-haw! No, we're not talking about that. But here's how this takes place. We are called, you and I are called as Christians, and in your families, to be agents of hope. That's just how it is. We're called to be agents of hope. There has got to be an environment of hope in your life. I'm going to say something that's going to sound very harsh right now, but it's true, and it's true even in my own life. If there's not an environment of hope in your home, it's your fault. It is. I'm not trying to be condemning. I mean, there's at times when there's an environment of darkness in my house, and we got to start over. How do we start this over? It's too busy. It's too crazy. It seems like nothing's going good. Okay, this starts with me. If there's going to be hope in my house, I have to be the agent, and I have to push through. And here's how I know it's my fault, and here's how I know it's your fault. Because we are all pushing something. We're pushing bitterness. We're pushing anger. We're pushing gossip. We're pushing revenge. We're pushing worry. We're pushing codependency. We're all pushing something. But what you're called to do is to be an agent of hope, even in the midst of epically bad and epically hard times. Why? Because death has been swallowed up in victory. And there is no more sting in it. The Messiah has inaugurated this new world. And we're called to be an agent of it. Now, here's a few things that an agent of hope knows. The first thing is this. An agent of hope knows that hope is a person. Whatever you're going through right now is not the end. Death and sin has been conquered through Jesus, and this is only the beginning. God is unveiling his creation, and though I might be in the midst of hardship, he is there, and I'm going to come out on the other side. It's difficult sometimes to know whether you're going to come out on the other side, isn't it? You go through darkness, you go through hardship, man, and we're called to get through. You're like, Marty, it doesn't seem like there's anything on the other side. It seems like there's a lot of darkness. It seems like there's a lot of difficulty. 1993, my parents dropped me off in Florida at college, and they moved to Arizona. They gave me their address, and I was really happy about that. Very thankful. I was like, you guys really love me. This is great. But, at Christmas time, I had to figure out a way to get to Arizona. At the time, we didn't have money for a ticket, so what they did at our college, they had boards. It wasn't an email board because we didn't have that at the time, right? It was 1993, so they put up cork boards, the original message threads. And on the cork boards, you could say, okay, here, if you're going to this region of the country, look for a ride. Looking for a ride or giving a ride. I went for looking for a ride. And I found these 3 people who were going to LA, which is right on the road. I was going to Tucson. So I was super excited. I was like, all right, I gotta get to Tucson. So I met them. They're great people. There was Allison. She was kind of the leader and spearheaded the situation. There was Kim. There was John, and there was me. I was the last. They'd already kind of gathered these 3 people. And we were riding in a car that was actually, a car of someone who was handicapped. And so it was a special car, and that person couldn't get it all the way out to LA, so he was going to fly. And so we were going to drive this car across country. We were super excited. He had got the whole thing, like tune-up and new tires and all that, so we were ready to go. So we were called to meet at 1 o'clock that day, or 1 o'clock of the meeting day, which was like December 8th or something in December 8th in Florida. So it was kind of a nice day. And we got in the car, before we got in the car, we said we were going to meet at 1 o'clock. I was pretty excited. I was got out of my last class and ran over there. 1 o'clock shows around. John gets there about 1:15. All right, you guys, where do you think they are? We got to go. Time to go. 1:30 rolls around. 2 o'clock rolls around. 2:30 rolls around. 3 o'clock rolls around. I bust out my cell phone. Just kidding. It's still 1993. Or my pager. I didn't have one of those either. Basically, at 4 o'clock, they show up. We're like, where are we going? Oh, we went to the airport and there was a lot of traffic. Okay, we were supposed to leave at 1 o'clock. So we get in the car and we head down the road. We get through Alabama, we get into Mississippi, and in Mississippi, it starts to get super hot, a little bit hot, and the car overheats, which is not a good situation because we're trying to get through to Tucson, Arizona. And we're in Mississippi, the car overheats. So we put some water, we wait a little bit, we get out the door, okay, we're fine. So finally, we move and we get into Texas, which is going to be a short drive across the country. And we get into Houston. We decide that one of us wants to call their parents. Kim wanted to call her parents. So we stopped at a gas station in what looked like a very difficult part of town. And so we get in, and Kim gets out and starts calling her parents. As she's doing this, no lie, two cars screech into the gas station to the dark part of the parking lot. 2 guys get out of one car, 3 guys get out of another, and they start screaming at each other. I don't know what they're saying, but it sounds really scary, and they're getting mad at each other. Then, the car with the three guys, as I'm watching them, one of the guys goes back to his trunk and takes out, well, either it's a water gun or something worse. And I'm like, Kim, we should get in the car now. She's like, Kim, get in the car. Get in the car. We're going to die. And they hear us and they start looking at us. I'm like, okay, this is getting scary. So I go out, get in the car. We screech away. We drive down the road to the exit and we tell there's a cop directing traffic. We're saying, there's some guys with guns back there. The cop, no lie, says to me, oh, I'm directing traffic today. Okay, we're going to leave Houston. So we drive across Houston, get to the other side, go out and get snacks. As we get snacks, I notice a cop, we all get out and we all walk, a cop rolls around and just stares at us. He doesn't stop or do anything about it though. We get in, we get some snacks, we get into the car, we move out the door, we drive down the road and he stops us. And he has this big old cigar. That's one thing I'll never forget. And he's smoking literally while he's talking to me as I'm driving. And I'm like, yes. He's like, did you steal this car? No. Why are you driving it? We're driving to California, sir. Arizona and California. You handicapped? No, sir, not that I know of, but we're just trying to get to Arizona. We're borrowing the car. We're taking it. Okay, I'll be back. And he checks on the car. He comes back and like a half hour later, and we are able to go on our way. So we continued. At this point, I'm feeling like things aren't going so well in the ride. And we drive overnight, and as I'm driving, it starts raining. I mean one of those big Texas storms. I mean, it's just coming down. Car's pulled over at the side of the road, and I'm just going like 10 miles an hour, and they're like, maybe you should stop. No! I can do this! And we're just driving and driving and driving, and it takes like 3 hours to get what we should have get through this really, it was just horrible. At the end of it, CNN, I listened to a news report, and CNN says, the worst storm in Texas in 50 years has just taken place in this area we were driving. So we finally get on the other side of the storm. It's morning, so of course, naturally, we're on a road trip. We stop at a McDonald's. I get my breakfast burrito. I get in the car. I'm like, all right, I'll just drive to the gas station. I pull out, reverse. Another car pulls out and hits me. I'm thinking, is this ever going to end? I looked back, the car was fine. His car had a little dent, but he didn't want to worry about it because it was his fault. He's like, oh, it's no big deal. So I go across the street. When we go across the street to get gas, we notice that gas is really expensive. $2.17. I'm not paying that for gas in 1993. So I'm like, let me just drive to the next gas station. They're like, no, maybe we should just, no, let's just do this. So I drive 17 miles, and at 17 miles, I know this because I'm watching the counter and I'm watching the empty. At the 17 miles, I see there's a sign that says next gas station, 48 miles. So I got to drive back 17 miles to get expensive gas. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if this is ever going to end. We get the expensive gas, and we move forward. We get to New Mexico. We stop at a restaurant later that evening. John gets some chicken nuggets. Chicken nuggets that apparently don't agree with him. Because we get in the back seat, he's sitting on one side, I'm sitting in the other. He's like, you should get out, man. I'm like, I'm tired, dude. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to fall asleep. It smelled. It was nasty. It was disgusting. It was everywhere. We have to clean it up. The guys have to clean it up because I guess that's our job. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if this is ever going to end. We move farther into New Mexico. Allison is driving. I'm like really tired, and everybody's kind of like not talking anymore. We drive up to this, next to this car that happens to be right near me. And it's an older couple, and they decide they want to get into our lane. Unfortunately, we were in that lane. And so we get pushed off into a ditch, which thankfully, we are literally all the way in the ditch, but we're in New Mexico and not like in some major ditch. And we come out, and we just stop. We're like, thank you, God, for getting us through this. But this just doesn't seem like it's ever going to end. We get into Arizona, and no lie, 20 minutes away, about 45 minutes from my house, but 20 minutes away from Tucson, the car breaks down. It just dies. It stops. It's done. It doesn't move at all. So we call my dad. My dad brought us home, and we got to my house. And then they called their parents, and they got home eventually in the next couple days. And one of the things that I'm thinking about that story is this. It felt like we were never going to get there. We were never going to get home. And I'm wondering if Christians sometimes get to the point where they feel like nothing is ever going to change. Christians for centuries and centuries and even millennia now have said this and this and this, and it seems like there's no hope at all. But here's the beautiful thing. Now check this out. I wasn't excited about getting to a place that I'd never been to. It wasn't like I was like, oh, wow, I get to be going home to some place I've never been to a building. No, I was excited about going to see my family. I was excited about going to see my dad. And when my dad came up and he picked us up and I grabbed him and I hugged him, it was amazing to see him. But as followers of Christ, sometimes I think, wow, when we get to this idea, oh, we're just in a better place. We're going to a better place. No, we're going to be with Jesus. That is the historic Christian teaching that we really do believe. And it is so exciting and it's so awesome and it's why we sing. Not because of some ethereal place like, oh man, it's not here. I won't have to work a part-time job there. It's not that. It's like we get to be with Jesus and we get to worship him, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Man, that's something I can sink my teeth into. And sometimes it feels like I can't get through. But the hope that we represent, the hope is a person, the person of Jesus Christ. The second thing the agents of hope know is that I play a part in hope. Go ahead and say that with me. I play a part in hope. That's so true, you know what I mean? Paul says this, be strong and immovable. Work enthusiastically. Here's what I know. I'm a pretty positive person. I'm a pretty hope-filled person. But there are people in my life and in my world who are miserable. They see me a lot of time. Maybe they see me every day or every couple of days or every week or every Sunday or every, whatever, in various situations. And they're miserable. And here's the thing about hope, is it's not enough for me to just be hopeful. I have to push hope. The hope that is a person. I have to push the fact that we have a hope. Specifically in my homes. I have to push the fact that Jesus is amazing, that he's alive, that he's resurrected, that he's inaugurated this amazing new creation that is coming. And there's no more sting in death. There is no more victory in sin. But that I play a part in hope. It's not enough for you to be hopeful in your family. But people are pushing gossip and complaining and revenge. People push that stuff all the time. Being difficult. What about pushing back? Instead of pushing that back, what about pushing hope? Man, I'm sorry you're going through that. What can I do to offer hope? I want to give it to you. Is it words? A lot of times it's not because you want to be fake. But what can I do to offer hope to you? What do you need that's going to change your perspective? What do you need that's going to show Jesus in your life? I want to offer that. Man, let's be an agent of hope in our world, and not just in our world like this, an ethereal place, but in our families. It starts in my home. It starts in your home. I play a part in hope. And my prayer for you is to put your hope in a person so that you can be a hope-filled person who pushes hope to every person. This week, let me go back a little bit. In 2005, I started playing basketball again. And World's Gym, I played, and I just played by myself every day. There at the World's Gym at the Greendale Mall. Greendale Mall, yeah. This guy comes in one day, he's 6'10". He's just massive. I'm like, you don't want to play, right? You want to work out or something? Because you don't want to do this. And we start playing. We play for a year and a half. We play almost every day, Monday through Friday. It's just an amazing, amazing time. And he just was this awesome guy who let me win sometimes. Boss. His name was Boss. I'm not sure if I shared that. Just massive. About a year ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He came to play basketball. We both switched over to the Y, and he had the privilege of meeting all the guys I play with there. And 4 months ago, he played for the last time. And he came back, and he looked emaciated. There was nothing left. But you know what? He went into that scenario, and he had this big smile, like he always did. And he was a follower of Christ. And he had this big smile, and he wanted to put everybody at rest. So he joked and laughed with them. And nobody wanted to play because they were afraid they were going to hurt him. But it was so amazing to see that even through that, he smiled and was joyful and could see the light in that situation at the end of the tunnel. And I was privileged to be able to hear some of the stories from the guys I play basketball with of how he affected their lives. Man, that smile. Man, that kind word. Man, he was always... And it wasn't fake. Like this guy literally, he'd walk in and you think, man, he's gonna destroy me. And instead of coming down low, he'd shoot from 3-point land. Because he didn't want you to think that he wanted to connect with people. There is hope through really, really difficult times. This is the story of Jesus. It's not follow this rule, put yourself in a box. The story of Jesus is how God decided to change the world when it was destroyed by sin.